my goosebumps as I say this to you. It's the courage that's being shown to be out there, knowing what they're up against and knowing what the regime is going to do in exchange for that is just, awe-worthy. I'm here talking to you today because the internet is off in Iran, and we want to make sure that the voice of the Iranian people is heard, their message is heard, and that it's not taken over by the sort of manipulation and intentions of people outside of Iran who have their own objectives in the country.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn. Dunn is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a cold, wet, windy Wednesday evening on the lands of my grandparents, actually. We're in Erin's Green Isle on the land of the Gales because I'm in Dublin with Dunn Street to launch a partnership with some of our friends at Alice, which is a public relations firm here in the Irish capital, and to lead a session on community organising and relationship building as a part of the Alice's Academy for Activists, which kicks off this coming Friday, which is really exciting. What's also exciting is this is our first episode for 2026 after having a bit of a break. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you all got a good Christmas break and managed to get some time at the beach, or probably didn't get a chance to watch too much cricket. But I hope you are all refreshed and ready for a brand new year and a brand new season of Socially Democratic. And today's guest is a special guest. There's so much that's happening in the world right now, but in particular, there's something happening in Iran. And our guest today is Zahra Amanpour. And Zahra was born in Tehran in 1979, right in the thick of the Iranian Revolution. And when she was 8 years old, her father, a pro-democracy dissident, was killed along with 30,000 political prisoners at the end of the Iran-Iraq War, and along with her mother and her two sisters, they fled to the United States. But the community and the spirit of the Iranian resistance has stayed with her, and today Zahra is a social entrepreneur and committed to using for-profit business as a means for change. She's also a passionate advocate for human rights, particularly women's rights, and continues to fight for a free, secular, democratic Iran, which makes her the perfect person to speak to us this week. And she joins us on the line from New York City. Zahra, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, look, my first question is kind of how did we get here? But I know that it's more than just the events in recent weeks in Tehran and across your homeland. I'm sure there's a bigger picture of this. So for those of us that really haven't been paying attention to the history of Iran since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. How did we get here to be in this moment?
Yeah, so I will try to cover this as briefly as possible because this can be a very long conversation and only one topic of a whole interview. So I will try to give you kind of a briefer version of it. So how did we get here? This has been 45 years in the making in terms of the moment that we are seeing now, and something that myself personally, since the time I remember, and my family and the resistance movement in Iran has been hoping and praying for at this moment for 45 years. And that is the regime is on the brink of falling. That is what we want, and that is what the people of Iran want. So how we got there. The Iranian regime came to power in 1979, where the Shah of Iran fell. And the people of Iran at that point made it very clear that they were very tired of foreign interference in their economy, especially, and that the few were wealthy and the vast majority of Iranians were not wealthy. And very poor, and actually it was very hard to make ends meet. And that led to the 79 revolution, where they ousted the Shah. During that very bloody revolution, a power vacuum was created because many of the more progressive leaders that were rallying the masses, and people were listening to and sort of deciding what the future of the country would be, were either imprisoned during that time or were killed during that time. And so it created a power vacuum that allowed for Khomeini, who was the first supreme leader of the current regime, to step in and to take the power and to create the Islamic Republic of Iran that we still to this day are in the midst of. It's a theocracy and a brutal regime. Immediately after taking power, it started to crack down on its people. And to create and to follow what they call Sharia law, which is a very strict and distorted interpretation of Islam, and to really govern according to Sharia law. So for the past 45 years, that has been what the people of Iran have been living under, an enormous level of oppression and just violence and day-to-day struggle in terms of just everyday living. Women in particular have been the focal point of the regime. If you can hold 50% of the population down by using a distorted ideology like it does, then the entire population is sort of put in this position of being really dismantled in terms of its ability to accomplish anything. And that's what the regime knew and has continued to execute ever since. Over the last 45 years, there have been many uprisings in Iran. The people of Iran have never been okay with what happened. They thought, even they did sort of bring Khomeini into power, but with the assumption that there was going to be a parliament that represented all of the people, that there was going to be sort of a fair democratic process in terms of who became the president, that there would be many elements of democracy present in the government that would allow for the country to continue to stay open from a cultural perspective, political perspective, and economic perspective. But exactly the opposite happened. The regime cracked down, and the country was closed off from the rest of the world, isolated from the rest of the world, and has been sort of experiencing this ever since. These uprisings have all had different catalysts over the years, some of them being economic. The more recent ones were in the 2017, 2018, there were some very strong uprisings related to economics and sort of what was happening. Many of the, for example, the truck drivers were the ones that started that one, right? And it was really about not being, the prices rising, the sort of economy not functioning, et cetera. In 2022, more recently, lots of people in the West are more familiar with the Women Life Freedom movement that started, where women symbolically were taking off their hijab and saying, we are sick of this. We are tired of sort of our bodies being the target of your violence. And then, so this has been the case. There's been executions is one of the regime's sort of tools that it uses on a regular basis in a very vicious way. It does public executions. And that, in 1988, what you mentioned, 30,000 people were executed in one summer. So these uprisings and the reasons for these uprisings have varied, but have been all ever present. What we're seeing now is that the people of Iran, any sort of revolution, if you look at history, they get to a tipping point. Something happens that kind of moves the population to a point where enough is enough. And we have approached that tipping point several times with these different uprisings. Now we are at a point where the Iranian people, the economy essentially has collapsed. The currency has zero value at this point. And then since the 2022 uprisings, what most people are not familiar with in the West is actually there has been thousands of executions of people who participated in those uprisings in 2022. So that's what's been happening internally. And then there's been a ton of that have weakened the regime. Israel has been doing a lot to weaken the regime in the Middle East with its proxy. So a lot of these things have been weakening the regime. So it's gotten to this point where both the regime is weaker than it's ever been before, and the Iranian people are more fed up and bolder in terms of what they're willing to sacrifice and do than they ever have been. And so those two forces are clashing directly with one another right now within the country. And which is very, very exciting, because this is the moment, as I said, that we have all been waiting for. However, it's also, as more recent reports are showing, there is a loss of life and violence that's involved in any clash like this with such a brutal regime as the one in Iran. And so we are seeing lots of unfortunate deaths of the protesters and just violent tactics that are being used against the protesters. So this is sort of the two those two threads coming to a point of here we are, we're at that moment, and it's the tipping point.
You mentioned the women life freedom protests that happened in sort of that 2022, 2023 timeframe. How does this differ from previous protests and uprisings? I feel like listening to you that you have a greater sense of this may actually be the tipping point. Why do you feel like that?
It has certain attributes that make that, for those of us who have been watching this for a long time, make it more likely. For one thing, the people themselves that are on the streets are much more bold in what they're doing, which is sadly being responded to with more violence. But their willingness to put their own bodies on the line and their own sort of lives on the line is much greater than it has ever been. So it's kind of that we have nothing to lose attitude that we're seeing in people's eyes and the way that they're behaving and the way that they're protesting. There's a strong unity on the streets in the sense that we might not, Iranians, like all people, have their disagreements amongst ourselves, but we are strongly united, and the people in the streets in Iran right now are only focused on one thing, and that is the fall of the dictator. And they are saying that over and over and over again, if you listen to the chants. And it's organized too, and it's becoming increasingly organized. So there has always been a resistance movement in Iran that is made up of a representation from all parts of the society, all ethnic groups, all religious groups of the society. And they have always been kind of a catalyst and support to protesters when these moments have happened. However, this time we're seeing that kind of spread faster, and the organization and kind of sophistication of how protesters are protesting and what's happening on the streets is far greater than, meaning that there's a level of communication and connection that hasn't been there before in terms of a common goal and a common approach and sort of tactic to get there. So that is leading to a much more intense type of environment on the street, in the different moments that we're observing, as much as we can observe. As you might know, last Thursday they did turn off the internet in Iran, and so at first we had this flood of images coming out. We're not getting as much, but the resistance is smuggling stuff out and getting stuff out through all types of ways, and that continues to be what we're seeing on the ground.
So paint a picture for us. What are the protesters doing? Like, what's the daily experience for protesters across the country in terms of the way that they're demonstrating or trying to put pressure on the current dictatorship?
So this uprising started in the Grand Bazaar, which is a famous landmark in Iran, which is the shops. Bazaar, most people are familiar with that term. It means the shopkeepers, right? And when the currency collapsed, they closed their shops and came out and started to protest. That has been a common theme that we're seeing across the country, where people are closing, businesses closed altogether. And those business owners and the people who patron those business owners are coming into the streets and sort of protesting the economic outlook for the country and what's happening, and blaming it directly on the government. And that's one common theme. Another common thread that we're seeing is the cry for no dictatorship. They don't want, there's a lot of Western media now that is suggesting that the Iranian people want the old monarchy back, and that's what they're looking for in terms of a future government. That is preposterous. I mean, why would we go back to another dictatorship? That is because that dictatorship was kicked out because it could be controlled by certain sort of powers that be. So the Iranian people, there's a very common thread of, we don't want any type of dictatorship. We want freedom. We want opportunity. We want to have future. We want hope, and that's sort of what they're looking towards, and that comes through obviously democracy and freedom. So those are some of the common threads. We're seeing much more aggressive tactics in terms of confrontations that are happening on the street. Protesters are willing to kind of go face to face. Anyone who's grabbed on the street by the regime's forces, they are then surrounded by protesters who fight back and try to get that person out of their hands and start to sort of attack back. And that kind of sort of bold aggression is something that we're seeing across the board happening, where and it's not only, there has been, now reports are saying above 3,000 is kind of confirmed, and most human rights groups will agree with that. The resistance is now saying it's closer to 4,000 to 5,000 that have been killed. 20,000 people have been arrested in the past 2 weeks, and the regime is saying that their fate is execution. So we are on the brink of what the regime has done in the past, as I explained in 1988, is literally executed tens of thousands of people to get people to stop protesting, and it has about 20,000 people in their prisons right now that they're threatening that with. So you can imagine the tension there. So people are defending people on the street who are being grabbed and trying to get them out of the hands of the forces. So we're seeing a lot more of that. So as I said, it's very, very tense. I mean, they're going up against, they're not backing down, and they're really sort of have some very organized tactics in how they're doing that, and how they're protecting each other, and how they're kind of getting moving forward as one movement.
It must be incredibly difficult for you as an Iranian, but living in the United States, to be seeing this happening in the moment. How are you feeling at the moment, and how are folks in the Iranian community outside of Iran feeling in this moment?
It is difficult to see the images that are coming out in terms of obviously the people that have been killed and violently injured. But to be frank, we are excited. This is a moment that has been coming for a very long time. And we have known, and we know today, this regime is not going to go down without a really big fight. What we're hoping for is that it's quick as possible, and it's as bloodless as possible in terms of what happens in the coming weeks and coming months. But anyone who's out on the street today, all of us who are observing from around the world, are well aware of the fact that this is going to be violent, and we are prepared for that. And the people of Iran right now are showing, my goosebumps as I say this to you. It's the courage that's being shown to be out there, knowing what they're up against and knowing what the regime is going to do in exchange for that is just, awe-worthy. And so we are trying to be as supportive as possible. I'm here talking to you today because the internet is off in Iran, and we want to make sure that the voice of the Iranian people is heard, their message is heard, and that it's not taken over by the sort of manipulation and intentions of people outside of Iran who have their own objectives in the country. And that's what we're seeing happen in mainstream media. So we're really trying to make sure that doesn't get the message of the people doesn't get buried, and really be supportive as much as we can to help them get to that moment and to help them topple the regime as quickly as possible.
I want to come to that in terms of how the West is interpreting this in a moment. But before we do that, tell us a bit more about the current Ayatollah. He's 86 years old. He's ruled Iran for 3 decades. I think he's the longest serving dictator in the world. Not that you'd want that award to be ascribed to you. But I mean, is he actually running the country right now, or are others actually in charge? Given that he's almost in his 90s.
He's running the country, and his people are running the country. One of the things that the Iranian government is set up and this is one thing that has confused the West in terms of the possibility of reform and the possibility of progress happening in Iran in the last 45 years. Technically speaking, Iran claims to have a free election. However, without the supreme leader's endorsement, you don't get to run for election. So anyone who's in office, anyone who's in parliament, anyone who's in the president's office, anyone who's in any seat of any authority in Iran has the complete endorsement of the Khamenei. So that's something that has to be that's something that people don't quite understand, because they're like, you have ballots, you have votes, you have, yes, but they're not legitimate. And the institution itself is not, it's corrupt and doesn't allow for a true democracy to really take place. So yes, he's very much still in control. There's a succession plan. He has a son. They have all of that has been very clearly laid out. And the people closest to him in the regime. There is inner fighting in the regime, and that's another thing that has weakened it over the last couple of decades. There's been a lot of inner fighting that have made it, but they all ideologically agree. They all are invested financially. I mean, the amount of money that these people have stolen from the country, and so that incentive is there, that they're all on the same page in terms of whatever it takes to preserve their republic, they call it, we will do together. And on that front, they're very united. They may disagree on, the more petty things that they, don't really change the bigger picture. But on the big picture, they agree completely, and he is completely in charge still. But hopefully that is now going to change.
When I think about Iran's position in the region, and prior to October 7 and the massacre in Israel, they were able to, weaponize Hamas and the Palestinians in Gaza and be a threat to Israel on their southern border. They were supporting Hezbollah, who were just roaming southern Lebanon and acting in Iran's interests in southern Lebanon, parts of western Syria, and obviously threatening Israel on their northern border. And they're obviously propping up the al-Assad dictatorship in Syria. There was Iranian-backed militias that they were deeply embedded in Iraq's security structure, enabling them to sort of have arms freely flow across the region into Syria, into Lebanon, and support these proxies. So they've effectively had this sort of established this hands-off proxy firewall against Israel, and without seeming to be getting their hands dirty. But then since the war in Israel and Gaza, things have just changed so much. Like obviously Hamas are a shell of the organisation they once were. Hezbollah, who were probably regarded as the most potent military directly against Israel. Now they're reduced to sending sternly written emails when they want to protest about something. Obviously Syria's fallen. And then we had this attack on Iran, a seven-day attack in which Israel and the United States had complete superiority of air control over Iran for that whole period, and damaged, Iran's leadership and their military and their scientific program. It just fell away so quickly. How much influence has the destabilization in the Middle East since October 7 impacted where we are today right now? And have folks on the ground and moderates within Iran said, this actually is the opportunity for us it's not just the economic situation with the value of the currency, but they're weakened. We always probably looked at Iran as this dominating force within the Middle East. But it seems like it's a house of cards. I just find it fascinating.
It is, and you just described that very well. Iran has always, this regime thrives in chaos and violence, and it projects that outside of the country in all types of ways through its proxies. It is the main culprit of Islamic fundamentalism. Islamic fundamentalism was really born out of the Iranian sort of version of it and has now warped into all different forms of Islamic fundamentalism, which has only hurt the people of the Middle East. And they've been more hurt by that than anybody and in this world. The people who are living in these places where Islamic fundamentalism has taken hold of that of the government and of the people. So that is the way that they have spread their ideology. It is also the way where they have, if you have an enemy to point the finger at, you become the hero, right? If you are the one who is sort of the people who are fighting that enemy, right? The enemy has been Israel. The enemy has been, today there was a sign that said, coming out, they have these staged rallies that the regime is trying to put on social media and everywhere to show that, well, we're back in control and look at our people supporting us. And those signs all, say death to America, death to Israel, death to England, right? And so that has been since 1979 the enemy, and so they have gained power and clout and sort of influence by supporting any kind of extremism that is supposedly has the same enemy as them, and that has also been an economic sort of engine for them in terms of how they use the natural resources of the country, where they spend their money, and how they sort of use that to benefit their country and where they stand in terms of the world geopolitical environment. So that they need that other, and they need that chaos to survive, and that's what they've done very effectively in the last. In the last year, really, let's say 2 years, they have been, but this is also back to when the general was killed, Soleimani was killed a few years ago, right? He was the proxy in Syria that they were sort of channeling their ideology through and channeling their violence through. So this has been happening for a few years, but it's really escalated in the last year, obviously, after the war in Gaza. And it has weakened the regime economically, and it has weakened it from just its sheer influence and clout in the region. That and the regime, there's always been this kind of teetering for the regime between what it's doing externally and how it's exerting its power externally, and then the suppression in the country. And those two things kind of go hand in hand. But right now, because it looks so weak externally, does that embolden the Iranian people? Yes, but is that sort of front of mind in the Iranian people's objective right now? No, they're just saying, because of all that, it's contributed to this. The currency has completely collapsed. They have no sort of, there's been targeted sanctions against them also that have been very effective, right? Those types of things have led to the economy of Iran collapsing and the day-to-day life of an Iranian just becoming that much harder and that much more restricting. So that, and as I said, the executions that have been very public over the last few years since the uprising. So that combination has, yes, definitely created a situation where the regime is perceived to be and is actually is weaker than it's ever been since it came into power.
I read a really interesting article in the New Yorker this morning, and this journalist was talking about the conditions that were required for the fall of the Soviet Union and also the communist regime in East Germany, and they were talking about, they were calling it middle management. I'm sure they had a proper name for it, but basically those who were in the middle management roles within those regimes, there was a moment there where they flipped, where they thought, particularly in East Germany, when they didn't think that the Soviet Union were going to come back over the hill and support them, and that, the Stasi, like the secret police, middle management had to make a decision. Are we going to continue to enforce these restrictions on people's freedoms, Or do we start to begin to relax them and actually then jump sides because you're at that tipping point? I know it's really difficult right now to get a sense of what is going on in the middle management within the Iranian regime. But I mean, are we getting a sense that there are, because there are so many? I was reading an article today about there are so many people that are in the Revolutionary Guard, and they join it because obviously it's good pay. Apparently, you get to go home earlier, so you can have a second job. Therefore, you can earn more money. Are there folks within the military that are going, when do we jump, and who goes first? And I'm just looking for that. I guess I'm looking for that edge of hope that can actually see that tipping point. Are you getting a sense of that at all?
I think that is kind of the moment we're in right now. It's right at that cusp of that. And I read that article too, and I thought that was really an interesting parallel to draw. Also, I think we're at that tipping point. We are seeing where there are a lot of instances where the fighting back from the protesters is kind of leaving these forces in this place of like, what am I supposed to do with this situation? I'm surrounded. The people are fighting back. They're not just sort of backing off back. So that's much more the lower ranks. Not even, I wouldn't call that middle management, but that is seeping up quickly. That happened in 1979, where the Shah, we call it the flip, right? Those middle managers went from one regime to another regime and just flipped over, right? And they were like, okay, now I'll hold the gun on this side for you, So, so yes, we anticipate that happening. We don't have any sort of direct accounts that is happening. One of the things that the regime has been very smart about is anyone in the Revolutionary Guard. There's a great book about this, but anyone in the Revolutionary Guard, the amount of money that is being made in the Revolutionary Guard, especially at any sort of leadership rank, and sort of they're billionaires. There's that are in the Revolutionary Guard, which is a crazy, like, this is supposed to be the military. Like, what do you mean there's billionaires? These people have been stealing the resources of the country. They're known for, like, in certain parts of the world, their kids are going to these schools driving these insane cars. These are supposedly military kids. Like, it doesn't even, it doesn't go well together. So those people economically are not yet incentivized to flip. Those people have been very economically incentivized to stay with this regime and are going to fight, because for them, this is about money, it's about power, and it's not just a job. The lower ranks, however, yes, it is just a job. And they will, as these clashes continue to happen, and sort of they see that, the regime is going to in fact fall, that will likely happen. We are only 2 weeks into this, and we don't know. This could be fast. It could take months. Whatever it's going to be. But 2 weeks, I think, is too quick in terms of the dynamics to see that quite happening in that way yet. But we do anticipate that it will.
I've been watching with interest the remarks from the President of the United States in terms of what is going on in Iran. Is this helpful? As someone who's living in the States, what do you make of his contribution to this point?
Yeah. No, we do not want military intervention of any kind. We do think the West taking a strong stance against the regime is a good thing. We do think the West helping the message of the Iranian people to reach the rest of the world, whether that be by helping the internet get back on, or using the tools that they have available to them to get internet into the country, communication in and out, resources in and out. But in terms of military intervention and political intervention, that is something that nobody in Iran wants. The people of Iran do not want. Again, that is what was the main reason why the Shah was kicked out of the country, and his government was taken out, because of the West interference in the country's economics and political scene. So the Iranian people are not looking to go back to that. They want, and at any time you have a situation like that where an outside force steps in, there's an expectation of reciprocity there that comes into play, whether it's warranted or not. And the Iranian people don't want to be at the behest of any external. This is our chance to have freedom and democracy, and to let that happen from within the country without external interference. So we are. We want the West to take a strong stance. We want, the sanctions to be stronger and stronger. We want, like, for example, European Parliament took a step of not allowing Iranian diplomats into the EU anymore. Great step, right? They have to kind of be suffocated from an economic and a political standpoint, so that they're isolated more and more and not able to reach their resources and sort of their influence. The more we can do that, the faster the will fall, and the faster we will get to a point where we can think about democracy and freedom for the Iranian people. So it's a fine balance that we're trying to, a fine line that we're trying to walk right now. Strong stance, yes. Military action, no.
When I read articles about Iran in recent times, from people who are, I guess we would describe as moderates, and people who want Iran to transition into becoming a liberal democracy where there are freedoms that we all enjoy in the West. They're folks that are now living in the United States or in Europe or in Australia, or and I know that Iran is got a massive population anyway. Are there moderates that are still living in the country that, if and when the uprising is successful and there is an ability to transition towards becoming a democracy, that leadership can step up and play a role in that transition? Like, I'm assuming there are folks there that are still there, but it just seems like there are so many moderates, like you and your own family, that had to flee for your own safety. Like, who's still left there that can take up that baton for democracy?
Yes, absolutely. They are covert to a huge extent and have to be. But yes, Iran is one of the most educated societies in the world. It is one of the most connected societies in terms of from both a social and an economic perspective in the world, despite 45 years of this kind of force being on top of them. So the Iranian people have all the things necessary to sort of transition into a democratic society. There's also organized resistance within the country that has been able to stay there, that is fully supported by the diaspora across the globe. And that's, there was those who fled Iran in 1979 that took their money that they had benefited from the Shah's time and took their money and ran and set up shops up elsewhere. And they hate the regime. But the majority of Iranians that have fled Iran they have fled. It's not because they were they had made great money under the Shah or anything like that and sort of wanted to keep that safe, but were because of the ideological, cultural, religious sort of realities in Iran. They fled because of that, like my family, and just our lives were in danger. Those people are still very connected into the country. And there is a group, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, that has 485 different ethnic groups, religious groups, and populations of Iran represented in it, that is ready, willing, and able to step in as a provisionary government for 6 months. They have a whole plan to support the Iranian people's transition to democracy. It's a 6-month sort of again, you have to move fast with this type of stuff so that, these power vacuums are not created and extremism doesn't rise and all of that. You want to get to democracy as fast as possible and really have a free election. So they are ready and able to do that. They are very well connected in the country and have people that sort of have been feeding them information and sort of data and intelligence about what is happening in the country for many, many years, and are guiding and sort of co-collaborating with people in the country. So they're very well connected. So those forces will all come together when the time comes. And people like myself, to be honest, we are a strong movement. I have every intention I have 2 children. I'm very, very settled in the United States. But if this were to happen, the people will return. A good amount of people will also return that have the intention of building a true democracy and a strong economy for the country of Iran. And I don't think there's anything lacking on that side from inside the country and from the support that it has externally.
How have you made of the reaction in the West to the news that's coming out of Iran? Who has come to the support of the moderate voices within Iran, and I guess who is suspiciously absent in condemning this theocratic fascist dictatorship? I just want to get a sense of how you've seen it being portrayed in social media and in mainstream media.
I mean, this is something that, I'll put it in the context of the United States parties and how this has played out over the last 45 years, but especially the last 20 years. Unfortunately, so what the resistance movement has been able to do through a lot of conversations and lobbying in DC and et cetera is has had several House resolutions that are bipartisan, supported from a bipartisan perspective, and has been able to do that several times and sort of showing that, there's support on both sides of the aisle for a future democratic country in Iran, with the NCRI being sort of the party that can help transition that government, et cetera. So we have support on both sides of the American government. However, in terms of who is in office and who is at the helm of the government in America, it has teetered between two ends of the spectrum in terms of what kind of policy has taken hold. When Republicans traditionally, or the so-called more right side of American government, has been in power, it has been a policy of aggression and sort of much more of like, well, we're going to attack, like what we're hearing right now, and sort of much more of that kind of take on it. And when the left, or more left of America, it's been a policy of appeasement that has led to, let's go down and talk to the regime. Let's talk to them about their nuclear program. We can reason with them, which nothing can be further from the truth. There is no reasoning with a government who hangs people in public. I mean, you just have to understand what you're dealing with here. This is not, and there is no reform for the reasons I just described. There is the illusion of reform, but the supreme leader is always in charge, regardless of what happens with the presidency and the parliament and anything like that. So the idea that we can have sort of a cordial conversation and get anywhere with that is not true. And so both sides, these are very opposite ends of the spectrum that we have been, depending on who's in office, this has kind of been the policy towards Iran. What we are looking for is a third option, which is support the people of Iran, support their road towards democracy and freedom. And there's some ways that Americans can do that. There's some ways that Westerners can do that around the globe. And that is, targeted sanctions are very effective. They are not, a misconception that is going to directly hurt the Iranian people. No, it's directly, the Iranian government is already taking all the resources from the people. So when you do targeted sanctions, especially from a military standpoint and certain resources that they sell for very specific reasons, you can, again, weaken the Iranian government and really take its economic sort of power away from it. So that's one very effective way. Another way is to do what I talked about earlier, which is give the message of the Iranian people to the rest of the world, share the honest message, which is not happening currently in the media in the West. There is a big push. It's crazy what we're seeing in terms of the Shah being put forward as the possible next option for government in Iran. That's just not even anything close to what the Iranian people want. So those are some ways that the West can support. We have seen, depending on what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the United States, who's in charge. Sometimes there's been a lot of support in Europe for sort of that middle road, but it often goes, unfortunately, on the very sort of polarized sides of the spectrum, and the same in the United States. So I can't say that we've had like a stark ally of any sorts in terms of our desire for freedom and democracy, but we have individuals, peoples in all of these governments and all of these kinds of authorities that have supported us and have been very a great ally to the movement.
For folks that are listening to the podcast and want to to use, your call to arms to elevate the voices of the people of Iran, where can they go? Where can you direct them to start to share some of that stuff on social media?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to NCRI. They are on X. They are on Instagram. They are National Council of Resistance of Iran, and NCRI is the handle. You can find them there. They have a lot. First of all, you'll get some raw footage from what's happening in Iran without any voiceover. You'll be able to see that and share that and sort of support that kind of message getting out and take, and what I say to people is take what you see and plug it into Google Translate and get the real meaning of what people are saying. Don't let the reporters, tell you what they're saying. They're not giving the accurate sort of description of what's actually being said in the streets of Iran. So I strongly recommend that people go get it directly from the source and sort of and hear what the people are saying themselves. You can also go to Iran_policy for more information in terms of just like the news and the political environment and what's happening around the world and what's leading to that. So those are two places that you could go. And just, if you see something that just basically is anything other than the message of democracy and freedom for the country of Iran, then just know that somebody is sort of manipulating the situation, because that is what the vast majority of Iranians want and are fighting for right now on the streets of Iran.
We'll put those links to those two sites in our show notes as well, so you can just click on them and then go and do the things you need to do to go and support the people of Iran. Zahra, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate your time coming on the show. I imagine that you're an incredibly busy woman at the moment with people wanting to know what's going on. So we're really pleased that in such a short time you could line up a time to speak to Social Democratic and our audience. And we wish you and your compatriots back in your home country the best of luck and strength to your arm, and hopefully things change with in a bloodless way, and democracy can finally be restored for the people of Iran.
Thank you so much. Thanks you for giving me this platform today. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.